Hotep family. I'm Dr. Nteri Nelson, co-founder of the Academy of Kemetic Education and Wellness in Boston, Mass. I am a metaphysician, a clinician, and an educator, and here to continue our e-course and our next day's lesson. And to begin with, I'd like to just highlight a couple of review points from our last lesson. So thank you for joining. As you will recall, in our last lesson, I was reviewing highlights from the Kemetic text, MerKaBa, the Great Pyramid is the Tree of Life, KaAbBa. And I was sharing some highlights on the Kemetic technology for remaking ourselves as beings of light. And we talked about the development of spherical consciousness and first eye activation. And in that spherical consciousness, how we have the capacity to have unitive, dualative, and particulative consciousness. And I concluded by sharing a slide of an advanced yogic meditation practice, which is just one of the ways we may work and practice and exercise in dwelling the MerKaBa energy body of light, the body of light that we may be able to see in all directions and transcend the heavy matters of our lives and move into those more refined soul bodies that our African ancestors of the Nile Valley teach us that we possess and may indwell. And I shared with you a video link at the end of this presentation that you may access a video on this whirling practice. So in continuing our e-course and moving on to our next lesson, today's lesson will highlight the next wisdom text that is used in our Kemetic Wisdom School, which is entitled The Secrets of Race and Consciousness, the African Cosmology of Kemet, with the spiritual meaning of the Nunu, the Nu'N Word Neggur, the goose goddess who laid the golden sun egg. As an African people, we are millions of years old. And as our African ancestors went out of Africa to populate the world, there unfolded three distinct, seemingly racial types. As humanity underwent varying climatic conditions and developed within their own ecology, three primary seemingly racial types would emerge. And these seeming racial types were depicted in the tomb of Ramesses III as follows. And they depicted these three distinct types because they saw no distinction from themselves as the Kemites of the Egyptians, later called the Egyptians by the Greeks, and their African cousins from the further interior of Africa. And these three distinct types were then named the African, the Indo-European, and the Semite. So since our African ancestors depict three distinct racial types portraying the Nubians and Kemites as identical in the Indo-Europeans or Asiatic and Semitic European types as distinctly and profoundly different in appearance, we depict three here only, three seeming racial types. These seeming racial types are variously called. They are described as African Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasoid, also Nehesu, Amahu, and Tamahu. In my book, Secrets of Race and Consciousness, I describe them as African, Semitic, and Aryan European. It is these three seeming racial types that form or inform our planetary consciousness admixture of our Earth. Again, it is these three seeming racial types that form or inform our present planetary admixture in consciousness. As you will recall from our previous lessons, our African ancestors of the Nile Valley have given us our template, our cosmogram for understanding our being and journey, both human and divine, that we are the mini-verse of the universe. And in these 7 planes of consciousness, we are given these 7 divisions of spirit, or the 7 soul bodies. So our African ancestors have given us this septenary for navigating our course and understanding our universe. And we see the septenary, or this sevening, as it relates to the unfoldment of consciousness and the seeming racial types. So here we have the present planetary admixture in consciousness, which is also given name, which I talked about earlier, but they are also given number by our African ancestors, and they are given the number 3, 4, and 5. These numbers are also given esoterically. So it is the African that is the seeming 3rd root race, the Semitic, which is the seeming 4th root race, and the Aryan European, which is the seemingly 5th root race. In this enumeration, we see that the 3rd, the African, is the eldest seeming root race, and the 5th, which is the European Aryan, is the youngest root race. Now we might ask, what about this 1st and 2nd race? What about this 6th and 7th? The first, just briefly, and there are more highlights in my books on the 1st and 2nd and 6th and 7th root races, seeming root races, is that the 1st and 2nd were godlike. They were ethereal. They were of the finest vibration and substance. It is within the 3rd race, seeming race, that we have the more dense physicality. And in the 6th root race, we are now just seeing glimmers of this unfoldment in this seeming racial type. And the 7th has yet to make its appearance. In this involutional process of the 1st and 2nd seeming root races, it is important to hold in awareness that the 3rd seeming root race, which is African, are the children of the gods, and we are the inheritors of the divine wisdom of the gods, who in our 3rd manifestation are taking on more physicality in this earthly realm. It is in the books Secrets of Race and Consciousness, and the next book that I will highlight, The Golden Sun Egg Uncracked, that we learn more about the first and second seeming root races, who are the Neteru, our fathers and mothers. It is in this lesson that we learn that these seeming racial types, these seeming racial type bodies, are just that, bodies where consciousness may register, where consciousness may find its registration and anchoring. These bodies are where consciousness may be expressed and unfolded. So you'll remember in our last lesson that the tree of life is the 7 planes of consciousness. And we look now within each of the triangles, the Ka triangle, the Ab triangle, and the Ba triangle, to find the registration of what are 3 primary states of consciousness, which collectively form that unitive or universal consciousness. And we look at how it is in the third that we have unitive consciousness, which finds its location within the Ba triangle within ourselves. This is what we are developing. We are developing this unitive consciousness within the Ba triangle within ourselves. We are working in the Ab triangle to develop the dualative, the relating consciousness within ourselves, which at its lower spiral can be a combative consciousness. On a higher spiral, it is relating the diversity and the multiplicity that is seen in the world. In the Ka triangle, we are developing that particulate consciousness or the particulative consciousness. But at its lowest turn of the spiral, this consciousness may be separative. We do want in the Ka triangle to develop the part. We want to be able to have that power of analysis and discernment. It is when that consciousness is operating at its lower vibration and becomes separative. And it's through these 3 primary states that we're developing in ourselves, as I talked about last time, the ability to see the part, the ability to see the relationship between the parts throughout manifest creation, and the ability to hold cohering the underlying unity in awareness, in consciousness, that we may have unitive consciousness. It is in the work within ourselves as we indwell the MerKaBa energy body of light that we develop first eye spherical consciousness, the activation of the first eye, that we're moving within all 3 states of consciousness, that we are able to see the part or one at a timeness, we're able to understand manifest relationship, and we're able to indwell that simultaneous all at onceness in unitive consciousness. This is the consciousness we seek to develop. And it is in the work of Secrets of Race and Consciousness that I talk about how the African third seeming root race has that unitive consciousness, and that the Semitic seeming root race has more the dualative relating consciousness, and that the Aryan European has more that particulate discriminating, analyzing, objectifying consciousness. And each seeming root race has the capacity to have all three aspects of this primary consciousness. And at the same time, because of their journey in unfolding consciousness and the ecology of what has happened on the planet, there is a propensity to be one type of, to express one type of consciousness over the other, even though each seeming root race has the capacity to indwell the fullness of first eye activation and all these states of consciousness. So we can begin to see in the psycho-spiritual journey of unfoldment the 7 psycho-spiritual types in consciousness that emerge. And these are the 3 primary egg, because the eye brings us back to the egg, which I'll talk more about in highlighting the next work, which is the golden sun egg uncracked. The eye and the egg are synonymous. And so in these 7 psycho-spiritual types in consciousness, we can now see how the blending in the consciousness of the human family is and may be taking place. For example, when we are in that 3rd consciousness, the unitive, there is wholeness, there is synthesis, there is interconnection, there is that I know, and that affirmation that this is that. As African people, when we were the only people on the planet, we knew that unity, that wholeness, that synthesis, and this is that, all this is that. In the dualative consciousness, as we made our outgoing footsteps to populate the world, we moved into a dualative where we needed harmonizing, reconciling of seeming opposites and trying to find balance. And that affirming of I know that I know, and this and that, or the affirmation of this or that, because there began to be this consciousness of opposites and stark, seemingly stark opposites. As we moved in those outgoing footsteps in the unfoldment of these seeming racial types, we began to unfold this particularization or particulative consciousness, which is multiplicity, division, diversity, analysis, and at its lowest spiral can be separative and negatively discriminating. And we affirmed, I think I know, and the affirmation, this, not that, and that, not this. And so as we see the way to combine these seeming psychological types in consciousness, despite the outer seeming racial type body, because we are looking at the secrets of race and consciousness, that is our goal. What is the consciousness that indwells that seeming racial form? And we are learning to look not just at color, but we are looking at consciousness. And so, so there are those in our human family who are moving with just a type 3, which is unitive, or a type 4, which is dualative and harmonizing and reconciling, or a type or combative, type 5, which is particularizing or analyzing or acting separative in its objectifying itself and everything in nature. And then you see that we can combine these in consciousness, that one may be expressing a 3-4 consciousness, or a 4-5 consciousness, or a 3-4-5, which would give us that spherical consciousness which we seek. So it is in Secrets of Race and Consciousness and the Golden Sun Egg Uncracked that we are learning more about the first and the seeming first and second root races, that we are the children of the Neteru, children of gods and goddesses, that we are the inheritors of the wisdom of the Golden Age, as the African seeming third root race consciousness that is stationing and reflective of that unitive consciousness. And it is in these combined texts that we then also begin to glimpse the emergence now of the sixth root race consciousness, and have insight into the seventh, which has not come into view. So what is the work that we need to do in our planetary consciousness to become more wholly conscious? We see glimpses now of this seeming root race unfolding. And why is that? It is because we are blending more this 3, 4, and 5 consciousness within ourselves. We are doing that blending. And it is up to all of us to step more into the vibration of this spherical first eye consciousness that has us embrace all of our conscious awareness and capacities, and to be able to express the fullness of that spherical egg consciousness. And that spherical egg consciousness is a blending of that third, fourth, and fifth. And it is in that blending is the culmination of the blending of the heart and the eye. That heart and that eye in that 3, 4, 5, which sums to the number 12. So we are creating and blending that heart and eye within ourselves by returning to our Kemetic wisdom story of Asur and Aset and Haru, which is regathering the broken body. It is Aset who dons her mourning cloth and is regathering the broken body of her beloved Asur. And this broken body is symbolic of the brokenness in consciousness that we seemingly have undergone as we made our African footsteps out, as our African footsteps went out to populate the world. We are cultivating the heart with its cohering power of love in the all-seeing eye, that we may be fully in our unitive, dualative, and particulate first eye, all-seeing eye consciousness at its highest optimal first frequency vibration. And what are we as African who are possessors of this unitive consciousness working on? We are working to indwell more that particulate consciousness and become more grounded. We have become ungrounded in our journey. We have our spiritual mooring without our tribal land ground to stand on. With our colonization and ma'afa, we are needing to reground ourselves. We are very confident in our spiritual mooring, and yet we need grounding to stand on. This is why in this day and age, there is the affirmation that Black life matters, because Black life has been so deprived. We have been so deprived in our particulate aspect of our being, to the point where we cry out, I can't breathe, because we're being murdered and deprived of even breath itself, oxygen itself, being deprived of water in the poisonous water of Flint, being deprived of home and shelter in our homelessness and our losing of our lands, even in the colonization that we have undergone, even the colonization of the spiritual realm, in which is now populated with European ideology. We are needing to do the work in reclaiming our part in history, our part as contributors to every human endeavor in the human family. We need to work with the part that has been traumatized, where our physical body, emotional body, mental bodies have been so battered with trauma, such that we, in this trauma, leave those bodies. We through our trauma, we vacate the physical, the emotional, and the mental bodies. We need to do our healing work, that we indwell both our spiritual soul body and our physical soul body. We have 7 planes of consciousness in which we are unfolding, and we need to do the work in each plane of consciousness, that we may fully indwell our spherical first eye consciousness. The seeming fifth root racial bodies are needing just the opposite. They're needing to work on their unitive, their third consciousness. They're needing to work on their fourth aspect of consciousness, which is relationship, and which is working on the unitive and relationship such that they may be more universal. Fifth root race, seeming racial types, which are Aryan and European, are working on the lower spiral of separative consciousness, which has birthed the seed of white supremacy, which has contributed to the wanton disregard of our earth and every kingdom, mineral, plant, animal, and every melanated being in humanity. Such a shattering in consciousness of the fifth seeming root race has caused a shattering, a loss of cohesion in the first eye, a falling apart of the underlying unity in humanity and in nature. And just briefly highlighting some of the things that the 3, 4, 5, that each seeming root race must do to promote the blending in consciousness, a sphericalizing of consciousness, and just highlighting some of these challenges. We want to begin to look at who among us, who within our human family demonstrates this spherical consciousness. When we think of who is working in a unitive way, in a relationship way, in a particulate way, and able to blend all three types of consciousness and demonstrate that spherical consciousness, who comes to mind? And who comes to mind in having done that blending that is moving to step more into the sixth seeming racial type? And that sixth seeming racial type will be about consciousness. It'll be irrespective of, although there'll be a body, it'll be about what has happened in the journey of unfolding consciousness. It is not just about color, it is about consciousness. So who among us demonstrates this spherical consciousness? The 3, the 4, the 5. What planetary leaders come to mind, to your mind, who have been working to uplift humanity and all her inhabitants? Does Rosa Parks come to mind, or Malcolm X, or Harriet Tubman, or King Namur, or Martin Luther King, Nat Turner, Marcus Garvey, Nelson Mandela? How do we see this consciousness outworking that the underlying unity of Earth and its inhabitants may be palpably felt, and that we move toward peace on Earth? In the words of Malcolm X, who said, "We've been took, we've been hoodwinked and bamboozled." Yes, African family, our story has been garbled. Our story has been distorted. Our story has been potentized to be injurious to African people. And so it is in claiming our part. We know of our spiritual mooring, and at the same time, our part has become unstationed. Our part has become ungrounded. Our part has become hidden or negated. And it is in the completion of our psycho-spiritual journey of unfolding consciousness, that the world again know of our spiritual mooring and the part we have played in every human endeavor, then our journey will be more complete, when our spiritual and material union has taken place. That which we have done spiritually and that which we have done and gained mastery in materially. Let us be ever dutiful in things spiritual and material, as we are ever so vigilant and vigorous in attending to Black life matters, that we are taking care and preserving and enhancing and improving our lives, educating ourselves and educating the world on African greatness. Thank you for sharing in this day's lesson in our continuing e-course, Uja-Seneb. Hotep family and greetings. I am Dr. Nteri Nelson, co-founder of the Academy of Kemetic Education and Wellness, a metaphysician, clinician, and an educator. And once again, I am most delighted to be here in this day's lesson in our e-course. We are coming full circle, 360 degrees in the spiritual journey of unfolding consciousness. In this planetary world period, we have been undergoing the spiritual unfoldment in planetary consciousness. And so we come into some of our most thought-provoking and profound meanings and revealing of secrets that have happened along the way. And yet, as we will see revealed, our African ancestors of the Nile Valley gave us this wisdom, and it has been the impacts that have happened along the way to us as an African people that have made this insight and this wisdom difficult in touching down and penetrating deep into our core in the way that it must be. We now come into our next wisdom text, which is foundational in our Kemetic Wisdom School. And it is entitled The Golden Sun Egg Uncracked, the Nu'N Word, or the Nu'N Word Neggur, the goose goddess who laid the sun egg, the cosmic egg. This book is a synopsis of Secrets of Race and Consciousness, the African cosmology of Kemet. The African cosmology of Kemet brings us into the Nu'N Word, the Nun, in contrast to the colonizing N word. And it is this new renewing in this word which brings us into understanding a state of unitive consciousness and wholeness, And this nooning and this state of unitive consciousness and wholeness is symbolized by the golden sun egg uncracked, the golden sun egg unbroken. The egg, as we will see, is symbolic of the entire psychospiritual journey in unfolding consciousness. The most primal N word is Nu or Noon, the Nu'N word. And as as African people, we are millions of years old, and we went out to populate the world. And as our outgoing footsteps made their way out to populate the world, we must now retrace our footsteps back to our primal source, our Kemetic wisdom. And that retracing brings us back into the Nu'N word, and which is our most primal N word. And that retracing brings us back into our most primal language, which is Medew Neter, symbolized here by these symbols here. Our most primal language is Medew Neter, which would later be called Hieroglyphics by the Greeks. And as we went out and populated the world, so too Medew Neter, the word, words, speech, symbol, and idea have also gone forth as our language has journeyed out of Africa also. And as the Medew Neter journeyed out of Africa, it became gobbled and confused and distorted in its distillation through the English language. And as the Medew Neter went out into English, words became or were made negatively potentized to be injurious to African people. And this potentizing of words to be injurious to African people has contributed to the fragmentation in consciousness and the separativeness in consciousness that we have experienced. And it is the result of this lower vibratory expression that has happened in these words that have contributed to our deep psychological pain, the pain that we must heal from in order to return to the source of our greatness. We understand from the law of vibration that spirit is matter at its lowest level of vibration, and matter is spirit at its highest level of vibration. And words are maybe expressing at that higher spiritual vibration, or words may be used to express that coarse, dense, material vibration. And it is within the noon that we make our return. It is within the noon that we understand our creation story as conveyed to us by our African ancestors of the Nile Valley in the papyrus of nes-amsu, the book of knowing, the evolutions of Ra, and the overthrowing of Apepi. What do we learn of our creation story about the noon in these sacred texts? We learn the following. In the words of Nefertiti, the Neb, or Lord of the universe, and a form of the sun god Ra, who says, I was the creator of what came into being. I came into being in the form of Khepera, coming into being in primeval time. I was or became the creator of what came into being. That is to say, I produced myself from primeval matter, which I made. I was alone. not existed any other who worked with me in that place. I made all the forms therein by means or out of the Ba soul, which we will talk about a little later, which I raised up out of the Nu, the primeval abyss of water, from a state of inertness or inert mass. I found there in Nu or Noon no place whereon I could stand. I worked with the spirit, the Kut, which was in my heart. I laid a foundation before me. I made all that was made. I was alone. I laid a foundation in my heart. I made the other things which came into being, and manifold were the things which came into being of Kepra. We learn further in our sacred text that my name is Osiris, the primeval matter of primeval matter. I brought into my mouth my own name, that is to say, a word of power, and I, even I, came into being in the form of the things which came into being. And I came into being in the forms of Kepra. I came into being from the primeval matter, coming into being in multitudes of forms from the beginning, not existed, created any created things in this land. I made everything. So our African ancestors of the Nile Valley give us this symbol of Kepra, and Kepra is the dune beetle that lays its eggs and rolls them into a ball. And this ball symbolizes the to be created lives in universe in total. It is a symbol of the sphericalizing force that starts in circumgyrating within the waters of Noon. And Kepra is this spherical and sphericalizing force, this ball that contains all the to be born lives within its being. So it is in the noon, the waters of space, the fiery midst, this stellar substance, this primordial substance, that there is the arising of the great breath and the sphericalizing of Kepra that causes universe to come into being. It is the stirring within the black, the deep, the dark, the boundless noon waters of space that this arising force is taking place. Our Kemetic texts, our sacred text and scripture goes on to say that it was I who emitted Shu, and it was I who emitted Tefnut. And from being one God, I became three gods. That is to say, from myself, two gods came into being on this earth. Shu and Tefnut were raised up, therefore, from out of Nu or Noon, the primeval abyss of water, wherein they were. And behold, they, Shu and Tefnut, brought to me my eye, the sun, in the train of a Hinti period. So it is within the waters of Nunu that we have this stirring in the arising of the twin forces of Shu and Tefnut, the children of Ra. The Shu and Tefnut are the centripetal and centrifugal forces in nature. So we have the sphericalizing force of Kepra and the centripetal and centrifugal force of Shu and Tefnut at work. And in this circumgyration within the waters of Nunu, the raising of the mound and the taking of the substance of itself within the waters of Nunu to penetrate itself and impregnate itself, and this fecundation and explosion of light in the birth of the universal Ba, or sun. So here we see the arising of the universal egg within the waters of Nunu. This is the universal Ba, also called the world egg or the world soul. And it is Shu and Tefnut who are raised up, therefore, from out of the Nunu, out of Nunu, the primeval abyss of water wherein they were. And our text informs us, behold, it is Shu and Tefnut that brought to me my eye, the sun, in the train of a Hinti period. So we see in this next slide the arising of the universal egg and the arising of the universal eye, because the egg and the eye are synonymous. We have the infinite all in all now in a process of perceiving and sighting itself. We have now the process of that infinite, eternal, all in all within Nunu, stirring now, and in that stirring, raising the eye and the process of sighting itself. Creation in the process of seeing and sighting itself. This universal egg is known variously by our Kemetic ancestors. It is the universal Ba. It is the world egg, the cosmic egg, the eye of Ra, the world soul. It is also called by our ancestor, Kyo bin Seki Fukiao, of Kakongo, the Nginga. It is called the seed, and the seed is synonymous with the egg. This arising of the world egg, this universal egg, is the effulgent light, the effulgent explosion of light that science would later call the Big Bang. And it is the dance of the twin forces of Shu and Tefnut that enables the coming into manifestation of these myriad life forms in Kepra from the cosmic egg, which is the universal egg, the universal all. All creation arises. And we see now in this great scale, this great chain of being, we see the arising of the universal Ba. And We see the arising of all that is within that Ba, the universal Ba. We see the arising of constellations, of super cosmic galaxies, super cosmic constellations, and planets. We see suns, we see planets, all the way down to tiniest atom and tiniest subatomic particle. So we learn in this great scale of being, we see within this great scale of being that there is that being that is ensouling the universal Ba, the Neter, the God in form. There is a being ensouling the galaxies and the suns and the planets. There is the being that is ensouling man and woman, that Neter that is ensouling man and woman. There is the God in form or Neter that is ensouling tiniest atom, tiniest subatomic particle. So in this great scale of being, we see that there is Ba within Ba within Ba. There is soul within soul within soul. There is seed within seed within seed. There is egg within egg within egg. And it is within this egg that there is the unfoldment of consciousness. The one doing the seeing and the sighting of itself. And in order to understand our journey, our spiritual journey in unfolding consciousness, we must now locate our awareness to our local Ba, which is our planetary Ba here, which is the God or Neter ensouling our Earth, our planet. And the name of our planetary Earth Neter is Geb. Our African ancestors have given us the law as above, so below. And so we come to our local level to understand our planetary consciousness and the unfoldment of that planetary consciousness, to understand what is unfolding within the universal Ba itself in total. Geb is the Neter or God of Earth. And our purpose is to understand the meaning of the planetary Neter Geb or God. Geb is our local egg or I or Neter or God or consciousness. Geb is the God of Earth, and he is called the house of Geb. And the goose that we see on the head of Geb is sacred to this Neter. It is believed that this is how he made his way through the air in its form, in the form of this goose goddess. And the golden goose on the head of Geb is the symbol of fertility, virility, and generativity. This is the goose goddess, the golden goose who laid the golden sun egg, the egg of consciousness. And we learn from our sacred text that Geb and his female counterpart Nut produced the great egg. And Geb is also called the Ur-Pot or the great cackler. And in the Kemetic tradition, the divine goose or great cackler laid the cosmic egg. And To cackle means to be the great cackler, means to stir, to arise, to bring into activity, to give movement and livingness, just like a rooster in the morning. Geb is the great cackler, stirring movement. And if you dispel the word cackler, it is also the great clocker, meaning it is Geb that brings time, starts time in this awakening, and starts consciousness within this space-time continuum. Geb is the great cackler. And our African ancestors teach us the following, quote, originally, he was the god of the earth and is called both the father of the gods and the Urpa of the gods. He is depicted in human form, sometimes with a crown upon his head and the scepter in his right hand. And sometimes he has upon his head a goose, which bird was one of his incarnations. In many places, he is called the great cackler. And in Medew Neter, this word is Negga, and he was supposed to have laid the egg from which the world sprang. Already in the pyramid text, he has become also the god of the dead by virtue of representing the earth wherein the deceased were laid. So here we see the names of Geb and the goose who laid the golden sun egg, and variously translated as Negga or Ginging Neggur, Neggur, Ginging. Here we see the pictographs for, or the ideographs for the N, the G, and the UR sounding. But before we move to penetrate more deeply into the egg, into this egg of consciousness, we want to penetrate deeply into our cosmic genealogy. Because Geb and Nut are the Neteru, the gods of the human family. It is Shu and Tefnut who give birth to Geb and Nut, and it is Geb and Nut who give birth to Auset, Osir, Nebuhet or Nephthys, Set, and Haru, the elder. Our African texts teach us the following, quote, they proceeded from me. Shu and Tefnut give birth to Geb and Nut. Geb and Nut give birth to Osir, Auset, Set, Nebuhet, and Her Kent-A Ma'ati from the womb, one after the other of them. They give birth and they multiply in this earth. In order to understand our cosmic genealogy, we come and return to lessons from earlier days in our e-course, where we talked about how our African ancestors of the Nile Valley have given us this septenary, this sevening in understanding the unfolding, the spiritual journey in unfolding consciousness, to understanding the universe and creation. They have given us the 7 planes in consciousness, the 7 divisions in spirit, the 7 soul bodies. And it is this 7ing that comes forth in our cosmic genealogy. And I shared with you, family, that it would be in this day's e-course that we would understand on a deeper level what our African ancestors have been teaching us. And that is, when it comes to the first and second, we talked about the first and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the seventh, the fifth, sixth, and seventh, in this seeming racial typing, in this seeming expression of form or racial typing, because that's all it is a form through which beingness and consciousness may be expressing itself through. And so we learned in a previous lesson that as Africans, we are the third stationing or third seeming expression or race or seeming racial type that is in existence and depicted in existence. And we talked about the fourth and the fifth. But here we see that it is in the first that in our cosmic genealogy that our mother and father, are the gods, are the Neteru. We come from Shu and Tefnut, who give birth to Gebenut in the first, seeming racial typing, racial or informing, and it is Osset, Osir, Set, Nebuchadnezzar, and Haru the elder, who are the Neteru, the gods who are we are the inheritors of, who we are the children of, we are the children of the Neteru, we are the children of Gebenut, we are the children of Osir, Osset, Haru, Set, Nebuchadnezzar, and Haru the elder. These are the first and the second that precede our informing this more dense racial, seeming racial type body, this unfoldment of consciousness in this seeming racial body. This is so important for us to grasp at the deepest, most primal levels, our cosmic genealogy. You know, we say we are gods and goddesses, and here this day's course and this whole e-course is to bring us 360 degrees in the detail and the manifestation of the wisdom of our ancestors in its primal, ungarbled expression. We have been learning in our prior days e-course that the third, the seeming African racial type, the fourth, the Semitic seeming racial type, and the fifth, the Aryan, the European seeming racial type, is where we are coming into the fullness if we are demonstrating that first eye activation, that spherical consciousness, we are coming into not only that understanding the particulate or the particulative consciousness, the dualative, the relationship, but also the simultaneous all at onceness in unitive consciousness. It is here that we look to activate that first eye and spherical sightedness, that we are overcoming our fragmentation and brokenness in consciousness as we re-become the 3, 4, 5 in consciousness, that we understand that it is not about the color, even though color has played its part. It is about the consciousness, the indwelling consciousness, and how much we have been able to put ourselves back together again. And it is in the putting ourselves back together again in this 3, 4, 5 consciousness that we then move into the 6th seeming racial form and expression of that spherical sightedness. And it is these beings that can express this fullness in consciousness that are giving preview now to the 6th and to the 7 seeming forms or racial types coming into view. We see here in this slide that the egg and the eye, and again the egg symbolized by these 3 primary states of consciousness, are synonymous. How we are coming into the Ba, Ab, and Ka consciousness, how we are coming into that unitive, relational or dualative and particulate consciousness in fullness, simultaneous, all at onceness within this all-seeing eye. How we on our little earth sphere, Geb, Neggur, Neginging, Neggur, or Ginging, how we in our consciousness as humanity on this tiny earth sphere, as we are becoming, as the Neteru indwelling this earth form, how we are becoming fully conscious as the Geb, the God, the Neteru that is ensouling our earth. As we are, as human, as indwelling our MerKaBa energy body of light and undergoing first eye activation and spherical consciousness, it is how we on this earthly realm, within the orb and the egg of our Neteru Geb, and becoming as Geb, reflect on this sphere, on this level of awareness, on this level of being, the all-seeing eye that is reflecting on the universal Ba level of consciousness. The goose egg symbolize the birth of humanity, the individual and collective consciousness of humanity. And it is Geb as one of the company of the gods who watch the weighing of the heart of the deceased in the judgment hall, according to our African wisdom, in the judgment hall of Osir, and it is on his brow that rested the secret gates which were closed by the balance of Ra, and which were guarded by the god or Neter himself. And the righteous who were provided the necessary words of power were enabled to make their escape from the earth wherein their bodies were laid. But the wicked were held fast by Geb. This according to our pyramid text, our ancient wisdom. It is Geb who presides at the weighing of the heart in the judgment hall of Amenta. It is Geb in which we have our birth, and it is Geb in which we are laid in our seeming death, but it is in Geb that we have our resurrection and ascent as we pass through the hall of Amenta, and we have been found true of voice. We've been talking about the golden sun egg uncracked. But what is the cracked God egg? The cracked God egg symbolizes fragmented or broken God consciousness, Neteru consciousness. It is the eye that sees in part and not in wholeness. And like the cracked egg, the brokenness of the body of Wasur is a key symbolizing the brokenness in man and woman's consciousness of the divinity within. Yes, it is that brokenness in the consciousness of the divinity within. And it is the result of the descent down the tree of life and the converging cycles of time which make up the spiritual implications of the perfect storm in which we now live, and which we talked about this spiritual implications of this perfect storm, which is a full chapter in the KaAbBa Building Lighted Temple, chapter 17. And what is this descent down the tree of life? It is a seeming descent down the tree of life, because from that universal Ba, from that universal eye, that all-seeing eye, we seemingly made our descent down this tree of life, down into these more material realms, and have suffered many impacts along the way, many impacts of loveless circumstances, which have caused us to forget or feel fragmented or disconnected from our spiritual mooring, from our universal Ba consciousness, from our wholeness, from the higher Ba soul realms that our eternal and primal residence. And the idea was for us to make this seeming journey, but not forget our spiritual mooring as we also indwell these more material soul bodies of expression. This is why on some deep psychological level of pain, we have come to call the Eurasian, the Semitic, European, Aryan, the cracker, cracking that golden sun egg and being bereft of the cohering power of love to put the egg back together again, because it is the cohering power of love, that Tahutian faculty, that love wisdom, that we put the pieces back together again. In this spiritual journey of unfolding consciousness, in this world period, we have been witness to the law of vibration in operation, where words have vibrated at a higher vibration and words have vibrated at a lower vibration. As we've moved from times more spiritual into times more material, and we understand in the spiritual journey of unfolding consciousness, we are making this shift from that which has been most material and dense and dark into a re-spiritualization of consciousness. We are the one and the same ancestors who, in the higher spiritual vibration of our planet, we watched the shade go down as we saw this descent from the spiritual cycle of consciousness into this material cycle of consciousness. We are the very same ancestors now who are watching the shade go up in this re-spiritualization of consciousness. And I have been coming before you for some time in these works, decades now, in making this penetration and in making this shift through all the material coarseness, through all the vibration, through the dense lower vibration, through all the coarseness of that dense material vibration, and through the trauma and the pain, and through even the numbing to our African wisdom. When Medew Neter was vibrating at its higher vibration, some of the words we knew and understood were the words Neggur, the goose goddess who laid the golden sun egg, Ginging the goose who laid the cosmic egg, Nega, the bull ox cow, symbol of heaven, symbol of virility, symbol of fertility. And I return us to a previous slide to see our African ancestors in these 7 planes of consciousness, the spiraling in consciousness from lowest matter to highest spiritual matter, because spirit is matter at its lowest form, matter is spirit at its highest form. They teach us that Neg is the bull located here, the bull of heaven, who is making its seeming ascent and seeming descent in this cycle of in this journey of unfolding consciousness, this journey through the 70 soul bodies and divisions of spirit that our African ancestors have given us. So Neg, we understand in its highest spiritualization of consciousness, is us, the bull, the cow, the god, the symbol of virility and fertility and life, symbolic of the egg of creation. In our higher vibration, we resonate with the word Nega, cackler, to cackle, to start time, to arouse, to imbue life. Negat, which is semen or essence. Negus or Negus, which is the king, the Ethiopian king. Neg is king in many languages. It is king in Konig, which is the Dutch, Konig, and in the German, Konig, or Koniging. It is the Negus, the king. It is Ginging, which is seed or plant or medicine. It is Gingingu, which is the record or archive. It is Kring or Negring, which is the Hekar or mantra in Medew Neter and in also the language of Sanskrit. And even in the English language, we find the word ging or gring. We find generous, gene, generativity, green, which is negre, genital, genius, integrity, ing. Ing is to bring into action of everything, to be, to do, a beingness, engineer, dignity, energy itself, and English. And in the Kakongo language, on a higher turn of the spiral, we find that word English. We also find that at a lower turn of the spiral, which I'll talk about in a moment. Also on a higher turn of the spiral, we find the Kakongo Nginga, which is seed. On a lower vibration, we find in Medew Neter the words Nginging, to destroy, to break, Nega, to strike, to smite, to cut off, Nega, to lack, to want, to be short of, Negeb, to break, to be destroyed, Neging, to cut or to slay. And in the English, we find such words as denigrate, degenerate, degenerate, niggardly, nigger, ignorant, indigent. We find the word English. We find the word to genuflect or genocide, negative, neglect, negro. We find at its lowest spiral the word gun, which is neg dispelled, neg in reverse. The gun, the weapon of destruction on our earth, the weapon that has been used against African people. In coming full circle, 360 degrees in our journey of unfolding consciousness and understanding the journey of unfolding consciousness, the spiritual journey of unfolding consciousness, we come in connecting with our Kadusha symbol, the Ka succeeding, this very powerful symbol of healing in our Kemetic cosmology, our Kemetic wisdom, that we may find the antidote of the serpent and take this medicine at this time in our dimensional shifting, that we may heal ourselves, that we may transmute the energies, that we may heal the traumas, that we may heal from words that have been potentized to be injurious to African people, and that we may see the way to transmute these energies as we work as skilled clinicians, as we work as skilled chemeticians, as we work as skilled metaphysicians. We understand that like a diamond thrown into a dumpster, the power of our Kemetic cosmology to reconnect us to the Nu'N Word, the primal, from the beginningless beginning, endless word, the Nun, that we may bathe ourselves, that we may refresh ourselves, that we may cleanse ourselves, that we may recharge ourselves from the accumulated and cleanse ourselves from the accumulated filth of this age, and that we may be bathed and revitalized, resurrected, and renewed. Family, when we come into spherical sightedness, the eye that can see and behold the pot, the relationship between the pots, and simultaneous all at onceness, and hold it all together in cohering power of love, which is Jehuti, love and wisdom. We are able to overcome the impacts that have happened to us in this world period. We are able to pour through our African text, our ancient wisdom, and read for ourselves. And we need to learn the language of Medew Neter. We need to read and learn for ourselves the whole story that our African ancestors have already given us, from the beginningless beginning and endless ending, that we are the Neteru. We are the children of the Neteru in this earthly, more physicalizing plane. But our consciousness is the all conscious, even in our local residence and even in our local apparatus in expressing the unexpressible. A horrible gobbling and distortion and perversion has happened in our story, our Kemetic wisdom, the wisdom of our ancestors. We are the Neteru. We are out of the Nunu, the gods, the goddesses, the Neter, who would inform these seeming racial forms. We are the inheritors of the Neteru as the first of humanity and the givers of humanity to this planet. In this journey of unfolding consciousness, let us do the work of overcoming the traumas, that we may heal and fully claim our divine inheritance as the inheritors of the wisdom of the Neteru, the gods and goddesses, and that we are the children of this earth, and who in turn give birth to the human family. Let us be aroused by this great cackler, Neggur, who continues to seek to arouse us out of a sleep, out of a slumber, out of a state of toxicity, intentionally directed to cause harm and paralysis in our greatness. Let us use the power of the serpent in the antidote for bringing cessation to this perilous drip, this perilous poisonous drip, and reclaim the words of our African ancestors, our story, our history, that we know the truth and the greatness of our being, and that Gebenut are our mother and father. Let us re-immerse ourselves in the Nunu, and let us pour forth the waters of Aquaria, or Osir. Let us cleanse and clean the accumulated filth of this prior age, and let us be renewed and resurrected. As the great cackler cackles, let us be reawakened to our stewardship on this earth, our Osirinization of consciousness, taking place in our local earthly sphere on up to including the universal Ba itself, universal consciousness itself. Let us awaken to our earthly stewardship in being stewards of every kingdom on this planet, the mineral, the vegetable, animal, human, and divine. Let us come into our full stewardship as caregivers of our earth. Netergeb, Mother Nut. Onk Uja Seneb.